The soft light of a late spring afternoon spilled over the gray runways at Dulles International Airport, bathing the cold concrete in a pale yellow that seemed to soothe the hurried breathing of the place. The roar of jet engines echoed in the distance as giant planes lifted off, trailing behind them the hazy haze of journeys, beginning or just ending. Dr. Vivian Hayes stepped out of her sleek black Lincoln, her high heels barely audible in the vastness of the space. She put on her Chanel sunglasses, lifted her chin, and glanced at the Gulf Stream waiting nearby. A private flight that would take her away from Washington after 3 days of presenting and reviewing academic papers at an international biomedical conference. Her pale cream suit hugged her slim, toned body, exuding the elegance of a woman accustomed to formality and discipline. Her face was lightly made up but sharp, with only a few traces of fatigue around the corners of her eyes reflecting the pressure of a tight schedule. She bent down to place her saline handbag next to her carry-on suitcase, nodding her thanks to the driver who had just opened the car door for her. But as she took a step toward the stairs to the plane, a dry voice rang out, "Please stop, ma'am." Two men in airport security uniforms emerged from a nearby patrol car. The first was Donovan, a white man, middle-aged, with a cold gaze, a frown that seemed permanently etched on his forehead. The second Snyder was younger, his eyes wavering between confusion and concern. Vivian paused. "Further checks?" she asked, her brows furrowing slightly. Her voice was calm, still maintaining her usual professionalism. "I just passed through the VIP security gate not long ago. Is there anything unusual?" Donovan didn't answer right away. Instead, his gaze swept her from head to toe, a look that wasn't just scrutinizing, but almost accusatory. "We have instructions to monitor an individual who fits your description, possibly involved in smuggling. This is a mandatory search," he said, his tone disciplinary but lacking in goodwill. Vivian stood still, trying to keep her composure as she felt the eyes of the flight crew on her from the stairs. She realized this wasn't just procedure. This was suspicion, perhaps prejudice. "I'm Dr. Vivian Hayes of the National Institutes of Health. I'm just finishing a conference, and I'm on my way home," she said, clear and somewhat formal. Donovan just smirked. "Passport and flight information, please." She handed over her papers, carefully but not condescendingly. Donovan's eyes never left her as he turned the pages, as if searching for a flaw that didn't exist. Snyder looked down at the file, then back up at her. Shy, like someone who knew he was on the border between order and morality. Vivian felt a chill run down her spine. Under the red sunset sky, in a space that should have been private and respectful, she found herself suddenly the object of nameless suspicion, and it was impossible not to notice. What distinguished her here was not her scientific reputation, but her skin color. She was no weakling. She had broken through the barriers of academia, fought her way to be heard on boards filled with conservative white men. Yet here, where she thought she was safest, she was treated as a threat. What no one here knew, or knew but dared not touch, was that she was the wife of Christopher Hayes, the current FBI director. A detail she kept to herself, not to brag, but to preserve what little privacy she had left in a life of scrutiny and calculation. She chose to stay away from the privileges that could have been easily used, because she wanted any achievements that bore her name to stand on the strength of her intellect and determination. And Donovan, the man standing before her, the longtime supervisor, with a face as cold as the concrete of the runway, saw in her only a hypothetical threat. A black woman stepping out of a luxury car, wearing designer clothes, flying in a private jet, and that to him was an eyesore. That afternoon, Donovan received an unsolicited internal message, as if sent just to be used by someone who wanted to do something shady. A black woman, well-dressed, possibly smuggling gems or foreign currency through a private airport. No name, no flight number, no hard evidence. It could be a rumor or part of the kind of intelligence junk that superiors use to cover up ulterior motives. But to Donovan, it was a logical opportunity to act, or rather a pretext he had been waiting for. In his mind, it wasn't that the woman was suspicious. It was that he needed to prove himself, pleasing his superiors, demonstrating his ability to handle ambiguous situations. That was the quickest way to get promoted. As Dr. Vivian Hayes stepped out of the limousine, the sunlight glinting off her pristine white suit and the thin gold watch on her wrist, Donovan could hear nothing but the sharp intake of breath in his chest. A black woman, rich, successful, powerful, traveling alone on a private jet. In a mind shaped by prejudice and jealousy, he concluded immediately, she is. He gestured for Snyder to follow. When he checked his passport and papers, Donovan discovered the truth that slapped him in the face. Vivian Hayes, a principal investigator for the National Institutes of Health, lived at an upscale address in McLean, Virginia. The papers were in order, the itinerary was legit, even a letter confirming the trip from the embassy. Nothing matched the suspicious target in the original message. Snyder looked at Donovan confused and said, "Let it go." "Sir," he whispered, "step back. This is a real person with status." I was wrong. But Donovan stood still, torn. His mind told him to apologize, return the papers, and retreat as if nothing had happened. But then his eyes glanced once more at the Cartier watch, the tiny but sparkling diamond ring, and the jet waiting to start. He no longer saw Vivian as a person, but as an opportunity. Donovan lowered his voice, trying to maintain his dignity. The papers seemed fine, but the way she reacted initially was a little uncooperative. For security reasons, we need to clarify a few more points. Vivian raised her head and looked straight into his eyes, her voice sharp but still polite. "I have provided all the necessary information. If you do not have a valid reason, I request to see your superiors or my lawyer." Donovan moved closer, his mask slipping away this time. "If you don't cooperate, I'll have to write you up. You know the consequences for resisting security in a restricted area?" Vivian glanced quickly at the jet, then at Snyder, who was avoiding her gaze. She understood. She was isolated, with no one on her side right now. If she resisted too much, they might accuse her of something worse. She tightened her grip on her bag, pursed her lips. "Lead the way," she said softly, and followed them into the deserted security room in the VIP terminal. After signaling Snyder to stand guard outside the door, Donovan turned back to look at her, arms crossed. "To be frank, Dr. Hayes, we were wrong. You're not the one we're looking for. But if this gets to the press, it could damage your reputation, right? A scientist being held up on the runway? People will ask questions. You know." Vivian didn't reply, just looked at him, her eyes revealing the dirty thoughts behind those words. Donovan smiled faintly. "But we can help you. No minutes, no notes on the file, a little service fee to get it all over with. Call it goodwill compensation." Vivian asked coldly, "How much?" Donovan glanced at the ring, the watch, then shrugged. "Just $20,000, or a few pieces of jewelry you're wearing." Simple, right? The air seemed frozen. There was a pause. Then Vivian took a step forward, her voice low but commanding. "You are abusing your power to extort a United States citizen in broad daylight at a federal facility. Do you know who I am and what I will do after this?" Donovan paused. There was no longer fear in her eyes, but a different kind of power. Power he could not buy. Donovan's face was growing paler, as if the blood were draining from his body. He knew exactly what he was doing. Blatant extortion in front of his colleagues. But his cowardice was so deep-rooted that he could neither retreat nor advance. Rick Snyder stood in the corner of the room, silent as a cold shadow, neither intervening nor protesting. He was afraid. Afraid of Donovan, afraid of the system, afraid of trouble. But that fear was now turning into something else, a gnawing sense of shame. Vivian stood in the middle of the cold VIP room, the air thick with the rot of power. She stared straight at the naked truth. Corruption, abuse, contempt for human rights dressed in the uniform of the law. She felt a surge of anger rise in her chest, not just because she had been wrongly arrested, but because she was being asked for money in exchange for her freedom, like a cheap commodity. She could pay, a quick, clean transaction. But that would be aiding evil, a betrayal of herself, a trampling on everything she believed in. Justice, truth, and dignity. Donovan half smiled, waiting. She could see that the curl of her lips was not just a threat. It was a belief in the invincibility of someone who could exploit a loophole. But he was mistaken. Vivian Hayes raised her head. There was no longer any fear in her eyes, only icy calm and a rage controlled by iron discipline. "I will not give you a penny," she said. Her voice was like a scalpel, cold, precise, unwavering. "And I promise you will pay for this illegal and immoral act." Donovan's smile faded. He gritted his teeth, growling like a defiant animal. "Who do you think you are?" He took a step toward her. "This is our territory. Here we decide who stays and who goes. You shouldn't test my patience." Vivian didn't back down. "I'm not testing anyone," she replied, her eyes piercing the mask Donovan was trying to maintain. "I'm just telling the truth. And if you're smart, stop, because you don't know who you're messing with." She paused, taking a deep breath as if preparing for the final blow. "I'm Dr. Vivian Hayes," she said slowly, "and my husband, Christopher Hayes." Donovan frowned. The name was familiar, but not immediately alarming. Vivian tilted her head, her voice turning cruel. "He's the director of the FBI." The words fell like ice. Snyder in the doorway froze. Donovan took a step back, eyes wide, his breath hitching. She saw the wave of recognition sweep across his face, from surprise to confusion to barely concealed fear. The three letters FBI were like a powerful dose of poison that hit their nerves. Vivian pulled out her phone. "Now, should I call my husband directly, or do you want me to start with the director of airport security?" The room fell into an eerie silence. Outside, the airport was still bustling. Isrania, but here, time seemed to stand still. Donovan broke out in a cold sweat. The walkie-talkie fell from his belt, hitting the floor with a dry thud like a hammer hammering into the coffin of his career. "You're the director's wife?" he stammered, his voice distorted. "Oh my God, we didn't know. I'm sorry, please forgive us." Snyder rushed into the room, his face pale, almost falling to his knees. "We're just low-level agents. A mistake. Just a misunderstanding. We'll cooperate. Please don't call him." Donovan shook as he unlocked her handcuffs, his hands cold. His eyes were almost watery. "Sorry. Does it hurt?" I'm really sorry." Vivian didn't reply. She looked at them, the two people who had looked down on her, now shaking with their heads like students caught in the act. But her eyes weren't gloating, just contempt, and a determination not to let this pass as a harmless accident. She straightened, adjusted her coat, and said coldly, "Justice will not let you go, and neither will I." The unnamed earthquake had just begun to quietly rise behind the closed doors of the International Security waiting room. Vivian Hayes stood in the middle of that cold room, where two men, dressed in uniform but behaving like thugs, knelt at her feet, shaking like thieves caught in the act. Vivian's eyes held no sympathy, no anger, no fear, just a silence as sharp as a knife, cold, precise, and unforgiving. Not the first time, she thought. She had seen power abused, had witnessed the corruption of ethics in the very system she had once trusted. But this time, they had picked the wrong man. There was no response as Snyder stammered out a plea. She didn't look at them, just pulled out her phone, punched in a familiar short code. Not to her husband, Christopher Hayes, the director of the FBI. She knew that if he intervened, things could spiral out of control. He was fire. She was ice. She didn't need his anger right now. She needed the system to take responsibility. "This is Dr. Vivian Hayes," she said, her voice thick with authority, enough to make the person on the other end sit up straight. "I'm in the International Security Lounge at Dulles. I was wrongly detained, searched, and blackmailed by two security agents. A Donovan, a Snyder. Send the commander in charge immediately." Every word she spoke was like a nail hammered into the message board of a broken system. She didn't need to scream. The truth, spoken calmly, was the scariest thing of all. A few minutes later, a whirlwind of people poured into the room, uniforms, badges, heavy eyes, and the highest ranks. Leading the charge was Security Chief Miller, who paled when he saw Vivian. He knew this wasn't just a mistake. This was a breach of national security. "Dr. Hayes," he choked out, "I apologize profusely. We will take care of this immediately." He didn't need her to say anything. Her eyes said it all. "I'm not here for comfort. I'm here to confront the system. Donovan Snyder, Miller barked, turn in your badges, security passes, and weapons. You are suspended from this moment. Follow the internal affairs team to the main office. Do not contact anyone without permission. Donovan tried to protest, but Kowalski and O'Connell, the other two officers, had stripped him of his belongings like evidence from a war criminal. They were no longer colleagues. They were living witnesses to a small historical turn. Vivian didn't leave right away. She stayed, signed the papers, provided evidence, proposed an investigation. She wasn't just a victim. She was a witness, an expert, and a citizen demanding an explanation from the system. And this time, the system couldn't turn a blind eye. The evidence gathered, security cameras, radio recordings, work logs, all pointed to one thing. They had acted on bias, not procedure. There was no sign of suspicion on Vivian's part, but there were plenty of signs of greed and hatred on Donovan's part. When the FBI agents interrogated him, Snyder was the first to crack. He revealed that Donovan was the mastermind, the man who believed he could extort a doctor just because she was a black woman dressed in fine clothes and traveling alone. The case was no longer a simple abuse of power. It became symbolic. The U.S. attorney formally indicted the two men on felony charges: false imprisonment, conspiracy to commit extortion, and violations of civil rights based on race under the Federal Act. An interagency task force was formed to review all surveillance procedures at international airports. Vivian did not speak to the media. She did not need to be a hero. She simply wrote a short article in a forensic medicine journal. When justice is served in the wrong uniform, victims do not need to scream. They need only stand up and speak clearly. The federal trial of Mike Donovan and Rick Snyder was held under tight security, with extensive measures taken to protect the identity of Dr. Vivian Hayes, the victim and key witness. Despite the media secrecy, the trial received significant attention from government agencies and senior security officials due to the seriousness of the case. Based on a compelling array of evidence and powerful testimony from Dr. Hayes, it did not take long for the federal jury to find both defendants guilty, including abuse of office, extortion, discrimination, and gross violations of human rights. During the sentencing, the federal judge could not hide his outrage, stressing that the crime committed in an environment of absolute trust, such as an international airport, was unforgivable and directly threatened the ethical foundation of the entire national security system. Mike Donovan, the ringleader of the conspiracy, was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, along with a permanent discharge from all law enforcement and security positions. He lost all benefits, his license, and the opportunity to re-enter any public service in the future. Rick Snyder, who was a co-defendant but cooperated late in the investigation, was sentenced to 5 years in prison, along with a similar civil penalty and restraining order. Both men, once badged, once empowered, and once charged with upholding justice, were left with humiliation and naked defeat. They had lost not only their freedom, but their honor, their future, and any trust that had been placed in them. In the eyes of justice, they were no longer security officers. They were symbols of depravity and betrayal of the ideals of public service. While the verdict cannot erase the emotional trauma Dr. Hayes endured, it is a powerful testament to the fact that justice, when awakened, can be decisive. Ms. Hayes did not back down. Through the shock and needless humiliation, she stood up with dignity, choosing to contribute to change, albeit quietly, in the fight against injustice and abuse of power in society. FBI Director Christopher Hayes, husband and head of one of the most powerful law enforcement agencies, was awakened by the pain of his loved one. The incident only strengthened his resolve to clean up the ranks, uphold ethical standards, and pursue accountability. The scandal at Dulles International Airport prompted important changes, from reforming the security officer training system, strengthening ethics checks, cracking down on racial discrimination, to implementing surveillance technology such as body cameras. There is no room for complacency or for bias to persist. This story is not just a verdict for Donovan and Snyder, but a stark warning for anyone holding public power, that power is not a privilege to oppress, but a responsibility to protect. And justice, however misguided, will never sleep forever.